Hi everyone, you're listening to the First Y Decoded podcast hosted by IEEE UofT, the show that decodes the first year experience by providing valuable insights and experience from current engineering students. I'm your host, Brittany Chow, a TrackOne AC222 and one of the logistics directors at IEEE UofT. Along with producer Akinori Kimura, we will explore various topics of academia and professional development to help you succeed in your first year of engineering. For this episode of the First Y Decoded podcast, we invited Julien Zhu to share with us his experience on getting a research position at UofT in his first year. Julien is an Indy 2T2 and former TrackOne student that did research in both first and second year summer. He shared with us tips on getting a research position and succeeding in research both in person and remotely. So Julien, what research topic did you do? Because I understand that you got your research position in first year, right?
Yeah. So my role in my particular research group, I had a branch-off project from my PhD supervisor. And basically, when I first sat down with my professor, my supervising professor, he basically gave a list of the projects that all of his master's students and his PhD students were working on and said, take a look through the papers that these people have written, do a little bit of research, and then come back to me like in a couple of weeks to decide which kind of project you want to do. And this was all during the school year. This was all during February and March. Mm-hmm. And that's basically how I chose my project. Eventually, I chose working with my APS 110 TA, Eric, and his research was on it was studying materials in simulation, and these specific materials would be used in nuclear fusion reactors.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I see.
Did you end up getting the connection through your APS 100 TA?
Yes.
Or
yeah, APS 110.
110.
Yeah, APS 110. So that was the first year course, and I kind of talked to him. Like, he was a pretty interesting TA, and like we talked, I asked questions in class, and at the end, like near December, I knew about research because there was this workshop held by an upper year student. It was also organized by the first year office. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I didn't really know what I wanted to do for summer. I had something in my mind. Like, I knew I wanted to do something over the summer, like an internship or something. Yeah. Or just like get some experience, right?
Yeah.
I had no clue what I wanted to actually do. I saw the workshop advertisement, right? So I went to it. And then the upper year student, Simo, that was his name. He goes to MIT now.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But he gave a presentation on like what research was like, and he also did research in first year, and it kind of gave the impression that research was a bit easier to acquire than an actual internship, and that made it much more attractive, right? Because I didn't want to go through like the entire process. I was a little worried, like, what does a first year student really have to offer to this big ginormous company? And then as a researcher, I have a little bit more, experience with UofT, with the professors.
Yeah, for sure. And then at that time, because in first year you were a TrackOne, right?
Yes.
Did you already made your decision on like whether you're going to go into Indy, or did you choose your research first? Like, kind of what was like the order between those two?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say, so I submitted my decision to go into Indy in May. And by that time, I'd already started research. Mm-hmm. And my research was in the MSc department, material science. So I was considering material science engineering as like, my actual major. Mm-hmm. But I did some thinking, and like I knew that I liked, out of the projects that Professor Singh, who was my supervising professor, like the list of projects he gave me, Eric's was the most interesting. And, I have found this research position through a connection, and it was MSc, of course, and I was considering MSc and all of these other different factors, but I think after some a lot of thinking, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go with Indy, but this project I'm doing in MSc, I think is still valuable. I'm gonna be coding and doing simulations with these materials. It's still gonna be applicable. And both Professor Singh and my PhD mentor Eric, they were completely fine with me going to Indy and not MSc.
I mean, overall, it's still a great learning experience, right? Just
Yeah.
having that, like, I guess, opportunity to work with the prof and upper year and in a topic more deeply focused.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So I guess my question would be, because I've never done research before, and you mentioned that you kind of learned about the research opportunity through a workshop. What's like the timeline after that? Did you find out about it, applied immediately, got a feedback, and what was the application kind of like?
Yeah. So the workshop that SEMA hosted, the upper year, it was sometime late in the year, I think December or November. Back then, I don't think there were as many resources as they are today with regards to finding research just for first years. Today, I think there are a lot of different things out there. Like even you guys, IEEE, they did a podcast with Dean Yep.
Yeah.
And he talked a little bit about finding research for first years too. But I think, so the process was, I went to the workshop. That's how I first, even discovered I could do research as a first year, right? And then the new semester rolled around. I started emailing other professors in January/early February. I didn't have as strong of a connection with other professors, so I was basically cold emailing people in January, February, and drafting emails and that kind of sort of thing. One of the big tips from SEMA in that workshop that was really helpful. Like there's a lot of things that he went over on how to cold email professors, but it was basically taking a look at other professors' research, looking at the papers that they've written, and seeing, is this something that you're interested in? And he was telling me about how out of all the people that he has talked with over his years, students doing research, he has never heard of someone who hasn't been able to find research and wanted it.
I see.
So I guess the lesson that I learned was that if you send enough emails and you do enough research into the professors, you will get something.
Okay.
So basically, as a first year student, I had the great luxury of not only being able to apply for research, but also being able to choose particularly the research position that I might want. I knew if I were to apply for an industry position, it would be basically whoever gets me an interview, whoever decides to hire me, I would just accept, right? There wouldn't, the process is so competitive in regards to industry that it would have been, whatever I get given, whatever I have, I would have accepted.
Just to get an idea of can I get an idea of how time consuming the process was? Because I know you were studying for exams and things during that time, and also how many cold emails did you send? And what were the response rates and stuff?
Yeah, so I would say you're composing emails. I think the email, as you write more and more of them, it becomes sort of a template. But I think the hardest part was
coming up with the actual the first email.
Yes, exactly, the first email. And for each email, I try to include something unique, right? Something specific about the professor's research or something like that. And then the first email was all right, this is going to set the stage for all the other future emails that I send out. So I want to make this one really good. And this one's also early. I was sending them out in January, right? So, this is the perfect time. And I knew that midterm season was rolling around soon. So I wanted to get the template done. So I would have less work in the future. But I would say, it takes a couple hours. It didn't take that long of a time, to be completely honest. I was also applying to industry positions at the same time because I wanted to hedge my bets. I think at the time I might preferred an industry position compared to research, but at the time I had absolutely no clue what I really wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to do something over the summer, and so I was just looking for different experiences. So I would say 3-5 hours a week, maybe, at that time, right? Early February, late January. And with regards to the email, I don't think I sent out very many because I again had the connection with the APS 110 TA, and I was still in the works of talking and emailing my TA and also the professor on how do I get this research position? What projects do you have available? And it was going through that discussion. At the same time, I was trying to compose emails to other professors in case I didn't get the one with Professor Singh.
Yeah, I guess I've thought about doing research in first year, but I kind of chickened out, which I shouldn't have. But during that, I guess, second semester time period, I actually have heard a lot of my friends doing cold emailing. Because I think as a first year, if you developed a good relationship with a prof or a TA, that's great, that's amazing. But if you haven't, I would say like cold emailing probably is your best bet, and is what what I've heard from most of my friends is how they get their research as well.
Yeah, exactly. I would say I was pretty lucky to have formed that connection with my APS 110 TA in first semester, but I was definitely, doing the same thing as everybody else, cold emailing. And it's tough, right? It's tough, like, hi, I'm Julien. I'm somebody you never met before, but I want to do research with you. And it's like, within the first few sentences, I wrote down, like, I'm interested in a summer research position, blah, 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 right? So it's pretty scary, writing that part. And I was lucky to have, like quote unquote, the backup of doing research with my APS 110 TA. And I mean, I think that's also kind of my first choice because, I kind of knew him and, I looked into the projects he was doing. They seem pretty interesting, right?
As like Aki just said, how were the respond rates? Like in terms of like you cold emailing, how many profs responded? Did you get any additional interview outside of like your initial connection?
So I would say I've had some pretty interesting stories because I've also talked to other students who've done research, and from my experiences and their experiences, lots of professors don't even respond. So you will get very few actual emails saying no, but the no that they will give is basically just never responding. Yeah. So with Professor Singh, actually, I had to email him twice. The first email, I waited about a week and he didn't respond. So I sent him another follow-up email saying, hi, Professor Singh, I'm Julien. I'm not sure if you got my previous email, but I basically repeated the email that I sent him before. And I'm sure professors get tons of emails in their lives, especially during coronavirus. They're probably getting inundated with messages and whatnot. But from what I've heard, other people have gotten responses from multiple professors saying, hey, you can do research. And then they've had to turn down requests. So when I sent out my cold emails, I didn't get any responses. That being said, I don't really remember how many I sent out. It wasn't that many. But of course, I had Professor Singh, as my primary choice.
Yeah. Did you have to do an interview with the professor?
Yes. So I did have to do, I would say it wasn't as rigorous as an industry interview would have been. Again, I guess one of the pluses of research is that it's not as intensive as an application process. But basically he asked for my resume, he asked for my transcript, and he brought me into his office and basically asked me about my interests and asked me it was very geared towards the specific research that he was doing, right? It wasn't just it wasn't questions like you would find in a regular interview, what are your biggest strengths? He was specifically asking me what makes you interested in this topic? What do you think is something in this field that, you might want to work with? It was kind of what do you want to do, basically. It wasn't it wasn't a test. It was just a conversation, I would say, about
I see.
The projects.
Did you have any prior knowledge of the field, or did you just cram it before the interview?
I had basically no clue about any of the things that he was talking about. It was the MSc department, and these are master's students and PhD students who are working on projects that they have some sort of idea that they come up from their undergrad and from their masters and just I guess read papers and stuff. So I think their projects were basically some of the projects were understandable, working with battery materials and trying to make them more efficient. That's something that I can absorb and kind of understand. But some of the things are we're 3D printing hexagonal shaped nanostructures. And it's okay. And everything, I think all the projects that you listed out I could understand at least a minimal level. But
obviously you won't understand the full thing, or else you wouldn't have to do the research, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think with the project list that Professor Singh gave me, he obviously didn't expect a lot from me as a first year, right, to know everything.
Yeah.
But I did my research after we had like quote unquote the interview. It was more of a conversation again. And it also the way that he formatted the conversation made me more hopeful. Like it seemed like by the time I walked in the door, I was going to be working with him, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like a test. He was asking me like, oh, what are you interested in? Make sure you're interested in this. Find out more about this. And that's what I did after the quote unquote interview.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was, I wanted to like enjoy what I was doing. So I did some research. And of course, I was also researching other professors at the same time, like looking into papers and stuff. And this was like, work, of course. And I think it's just part of due diligence, just looking at things and trying to understand like, oh, this is something that, I would find interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, well, I've also had some friends that did research in second year. I don't really know that many people that did research in first year, but then they had to do, I guess, some more intense interview, I feel like. Maybe I was thinking perhaps prof would expect a little bit more from like second years, third years, upper years, finding a research position at that time, whereas in comparison for first years, they don't expect as much. But it's also like, that's why you don't hear about a lot of first years getting a research position like early in that sense. That's my understanding.
Yeah. I remember looking through like all the research positions that were posted after second year, first semester of ECE.
Mm-hmm.
And they definitely required a lot of technical stuff, but it was also things that we already learned in first semester.
Yeah.
So it was like working with the FPGA
Mm-hmm.
and Verilog. So like if you did well in those courses or if you learned a lot, those were like research positions that were still attainable.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously you're in second year now, so like
mm-hmm.
you had to have more technical knowledge.
Yeah, more of a technical interview in that sense. But yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Because as a first year, I didn't have.
Which is fair, because like they can't really test you on a lot of things in first year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I guess now we've kind of gone through the application process.
Mm-hmm.
What was your actual experience doing the research? I understand that you got your own like locker and like I don't remember if you had an office or something like that.
Yeah. So it was during summer, so this was all in person too. So in first year, I also did research in second year, but that was online. But in first year, it was really great because Professor Singh also had 3 other undergraduates. They were all second year. Yeah, they were all second years at the time. There was 3 second years, and I was the only first year student doing research.
Mm-hmm.
But it was nice to have like other students doing research and like have other people to talk to about your struggles or what they're working on. And somebody else who's an undergrad student and not like a master's student or PhD student working on their like super high level project.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was sharing my own stories about I'm struggling on this, like I'm reading this paper, I don't understand anything of it, and they're like same. So like I think one of the biggest perks of being undergrad researcher in person was the fact there was other undergraduates doing the research with me. But yeah, there are other things that were great about it. Of course, like you get your own if like I had to jump through quite a few hoops to get even get the key to the office space just for the summer, and I was able to go in, sit down and just like there were other master students and PhD students there in the office like working on their own projects on the computers, reading stuff, talking. And I would just sit like at an empty space on a desk and just like do my thing, read papers, write code sometimes. I sometimes worked in the research office, sometimes just worked in my just in my apartment, and sometimes I would just like go to my hall too, or just like go to different places just to work and code. And that's one of the great parts of research was the flexibility of it.
Mm-hmm.
Those were some of the things that I was able to enjoy as part of the research experience. That was a few of the cool things.
I was just curious about like what kind of coding you do.
Oh yeah, so the coding I did. This was in the MSc department, right? And I also chose Indy, which does have some coding. And I think I chose this project because again, it was with simulations, and this was going to be skills that were applicable in my future. So the coding I did was related to. So I was working with Python and Bash to manipulate text files and scripts that were written in this other scripting language. So I was basically editing input files, changing values, and then running an executable and doing this, thousands and thousands of times, and then you would get a lot of output files, and then you would write another script to look through those output files, and find what you're looking for, or is this atom like going this deep into the crystal structure or whatever, right? Like, it was a lot of find using bash too, which is Linux, manipulating where the files are located and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a lot of like scripting and automating.
Yeah, exactly. Scripting and automating were the main things I was doing. Yeah. There was a whole conceptual side of understanding the MSC stuff and this is how things truly work. I'm sure with other kind of research you do that there is this need to at least understand the true in depth of how things are working in this particular for example, I knew people in ECE who were doing research with FPGAs, and they had to go through and understand why or how this entire project they're doing worked, and going through this is how this particular FPGA project is run, and going through the GitHub code or whatever. And it was sort of my experience as well, where I had to understand this is how atoms function. You have to go through first principles and kind of understand the equations. And while it's not particular, you won't ever quote unquote use it in the research, it's something that you still have to understand. And what you're actually doing, what I was doing with the Python and Bash, while I was more service level, it still required me to have that, internal understanding.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you also did research second year. Mm-hmm. Was that the same project as first year? Was it with the same prof, or was it a different project?
Yeah, so it was with the same professor and also kind of on the same project. It was a continuation. Mm-hmm. And since I think it really helped that, of course I did research with them in first year, so I could continue. And I also had experience in, I had the experience from first year. So obviously I think they knew that I was capable of doing the project. Mm-hmm. I was significantly more unmotivated because everything was online, but it was basically, again, it was more, the technical aspect was, again, still doing simulations, but I was more involved on, since I already had the Python and Bash experience, I learned in first year, right? I learned all of that in first year in the research position, because I never had experience with Python. I took the APS 105 C course instead of Python. I didn't know Bash before, so I learned all that in first year. And so second year, I knew all of that. So the simulations I was running were a bit more in depth, mm-hmm. and a bit, it's hard for me to explain exactly what I was doing without going into all the nitty gritty details. But I was basically working on more extended simulations.
I see. What was your biggest challenge moving your research from in person to online?
I'd say biggest challenge was being able to communicate with my PhD mentor and my supervisor, because I think online, everything's on Microsoft Teams, and it's much harder to draw out a crystal lattice structure on Microsoft Teams. Yeah. I mean, there are whiteboard features and all of that, but I think the transition was difficult for everybody in the research group too, including the master students and PhD mentors who are everything's now on Microsoft Teams. So that was by far the biggest challenge. I was really lucky to have my research be transferable to everything online, because again, I was mostly coding, mm-hmm. Python and Bash stuff, and doing simulations. But yeah, by far the biggest challenge was, I think everybody kind of can relate to this, but the fact that, I can't, draw out things, move things with my hands, or, have that physical interaction that you can have pencil and paper, and, showing somebody what you're drawing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you use your iPad?
I did not use my iPad, actually. I wasn't thinking that, I can draw out these things and send a picture. It was more I want to explain something and write out what I'm thinking. Because the notes so in first year, right, I took notes when I had meetings with my PhD mentor. We would have meetings, I would a list of questions, and I would go through them and jot down notes, right? And I found that format much more difficult to kind of follow in online research. Of course, it's still doable, right? But you don't have the same shared piece of paper and the flexibility that, oh, Julien, cross that out, and this is what it actually looks like, right? But yeah, there was just less flexibility. And of course, it's something that is inevitable with online, research. But yeah, that was a big challenge for us. And I think we all kind of adjusted, and we fine-tuned our processes a little bit more. And as a second year who had done research in first year, I think there were less technical questions that require drawing out things. Like I had fewer questions on less of the concepts and more on the coding part. I think those kind of questions, those kind of things that I was looking up were a bit easier to do on my own.
What is the most important skill that you feel like you learned through doing research 2 years in a row? Like, I guess more soft skill wise.
Yeah. Oh, soft skill wise. That's a good question. I'd say this also came up during the PY application process. But I would say the most important skill that I developed in my 2 years of research was my ability to work independently and ask questions. I think it's something very different from classes and even extracurricular like design teams, because you have this independent project and you have a mentor who basically knows everything, well, mostly everything about this particular topic, and you learn from him or her. And after you learn from them, you come up to this space where you and a couple other people are the most knowledgeable people on this particular topic. And gaining new knowledge is like this new frontier, and you have to go look for it, right? There are other people who are writing other research papers about your particular topic, and this is the very cutting edge of what's being developed. And I think being able to find that and digest it and ask questions about it was by far the most important skill that I developed. And like communicating like, oh, this is what I learned from this just brand new paper. It's relevant because XYZ, and being able to distill those important pieces of information, I think, were like really important things for me in terms of like soft skills, I guess. I mean, like technically, I learned Python and Bash during my research position, which are really helpful for future coding projects or jobs or whatever, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like technical skills is really important too.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure like automating scripting, I saw a lot of positions on PUI portal that had those kind of things.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that's practical.
Yeah.
In industry as well.
Would you, if you can go back in time, would you choose to do research again, or would you, I guess, follow your other path, get some industry internships?
Yeah. I would say in second year, if I had the choice, I would probably have chosen to do some sort of industry position. I mean, research was a great experience for me. I was really lucky to have like a supportive of a research group as I did. But I think my intentions even first year were just like, oh, I would definitely want to try this out. I want to get as much as a breadth as possible, and that was kind of my mission coming into research. Coming out of research in first year, I knew that, I really enjoyed it, of course, and I felt like I was happy with all I accomplished, but I felt like there were more learning opportunities elsewhere in industry, that if I were to go into an industry internship or something, that there would be even more opportunities and even more, areas to grow. Because if I were to do research again, I would just be kind of developing the same things that I was working on before, right?
Essentially, you want to kind of like balance it out and try out new things.
Yes, exactly. Diversify, balance my skill portfolio.
That's fair.
You actually had like an industry position, but like you couldn't get because of COVID.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a position in New Brunswick, working with automation trucking, something.
I don't an Indy job.
Yeah, it was an Indy position. Yes, it was. But unfortunately, it got canceled due to COVID, and I was very lucky again to have the backup of going to do research.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Julien, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
And
My
doing this
pleasure.
interview with us.
It was a great conversation.
It was excellent. Thank you all very much for hosting me.
So Julien, you mentioned that we forgot to talk about the funding for research, which is a big part of getting the research. Am I correct?
Yeah, that is a really big part. So in first year, I think they might have expanded this program, but I know that I was talking to MZ, who's the TrackOne academic advisor. But there is a first year summer research fellowship just for first years because a lot of the funding sources for research positions aren't available to first years, right? NSERC, which is a big funder of summer research for undergraduates, is only available to second year students and above. And that was actually what I used for my second year research. In first year, I think that first year fellowship is one of the big sources of funding that you can get. Of course, you want to be paid for your research, and it's a little bit iffy if you want to work for a professor and you can't find funding, depending on professor to professor or labor laws or whatnot. Your position might be contingent on you finding some source of funding, or it might not. Again, something to talk with the professor, and it's also sometimes a hard topic to talk about, right? Like, oh, how am I going to get paid? Or if I don't get paid or I can't find a source of funding, what happens? But it's definitely something that, should be in the back of everybody's head when they're applying to research. And also to note that the money that you're making during research is going to be less than what you'd be making at any part-time job, basically. You're probably going to be making below minimum wage with research funding. And that's just the way things are. But for first years, the first year summer research fellowship. And there are also, I knew a couple of friends who actually found other scholarships externally that just funded for research.
Were you working with iLead also?
No, not during the summer. I was doing a program with them, but not during summer. I don't know if that's relevant, but just you can cut that out.
Also, if you're an international student, you don't get NSERC, so you want to keep that in mind. I think there's another research scholarship you can get as an international student, but it's competitive.
Okay. Because I'm domestic, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, that's all for today's episode of First Year Decoded. Thanks for listening, and thank you once again to Julien for joining us today. This podcast is hosted by IEEE UofT, content creation done by Akinari Kimura, Brittany Chow, Himana Shindo, Haochen Zhang, and Catherine Leung. Music created by Sujay Kumar, audio edited by Akinari Kimura, and graphics done by Kathy Zhang. Remember to follow us on social media, IEEE UofT, to get more information and updates about future events and more content. Once again, thanks for listening to First Year Decoded. We will see you on the next episode.